Hey families, I wanted to review some things over our measurement that we'll be getting into. So there are what we call non-standard measurements and standard measurements. So our non-standard measurements are when we use items such as paper clips or, for instance, our actual objects of our centimeter cubes. These are what we call non-standard units. Now if we have a measuring tape, a ruler, a meter stick, those are what we call our standard measurements. Now, whenever there are some rules that we have to follow with non-standard measurements that don't necessarily apply when we're using our standard measurements. So one of these is to use the same unit when you measure. If I am measuring this eraser, I have to make sure I'm using, if I do this, where I'm using different units, my measurement is not going to be very accurate. It's not going to help me very much. So I have to make sure I'm only using measurements or units of the same type, like so. Otherwise, it will not work. If I'm using the big paper clips, I only use big paper clips. If I'm using small paper clips, I can only use small ones. So that's one of the first things that we think about with our non-standard measurements. One of the other things we have to worry about with non-standard measurements that we don't have to worry about with our ruler is this rule number 2, no gaps or overlaps. Now when we're using the centimeter cubes, it's the make sure there's no gaps. If I leave gaps, I could say that this is 4, but that's not a good measurement. I have to push them together for no gaps to be able to tell what the true measurement is. With our paper clips, it's a little bit different. Sometimes our flat non-standard measures, if they overlap, that's not a good measurement, but we also have to make sure there's no gaps either, otherwise our measurement will not be accurate. So that's one of the things that we have to keep in mind when we're measuring. So from here, the reason why we have these non-standard measurements, specifically these centimeter cubes, is because they want the students to understand that this ruler is made up of a unit and simply moving on. So one of the ways that we learn to measure our things is that we learn that we can use one unit to measure, where we mark and move, mark and move, mark and move, mark and move. So that way we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in this case. So it's all the same unit, we just marked and moved it. And we relate this to the ruler where we can see it's 1 centimeter, 1 centimeter, 1 centimeter, 1 centimeter. And so one of the things they can do is you can actually make your own ruler if you have a centimeter cube and you don't have what you need. You can actually make your own. If you have a centimeter cube, you can make a centimeter ruler. So that's one of the things that we talk about. Some of the other rules that we have that apply to all measurements are these. Start at the end point. You can't start measuring in the middle. You have to make sure you go to the very end of the objects, and you can use your hand or a straight edge to help you be able to figure out where your edge is. And so you'll go around and you'll make it line up, and you'll go from end to end. You got to go all the way to this end right here. Now, this leads into the next point. So in second grade, we don't necessarily talk about some of those higher fractions like tenths, eighths. We touch on eighths, but we don't go to tenths and other ones that are higher than that we would need for the centimeters to be able to read this normally. So in second grade, we go to the half. We don't even go to the half. We either, if we reach that halfway point, which it looks like this one does, we go up. So instead of saying it's 5, since it goes about half on that 6th one, we would count the 6. If I were to measure it with my ruler, line it up, it reaches that halfway mark, we're going to go up to the 6. We don't necessarily do those halves and other fractions that are on the ruler yet at this time. So that's one of the things that's very important, is if it's half or more, you go up to the next number on measurement. Now this one only applies to the ruler So on our rulers, the end of the ruler is not always 0. If you see, there is a gap in between the end. So one of the things that we have to teach the kids is to start from the 0, and then you have to put the end at the 0. Some kids will start at the 1. Some kids start at the end, and because they start at the end, it would throw their measurement off. Like if they did this one, since it doesn't reach that halfway mark, they would say it was 5 instead of 6, when 6 is the actual measurement. So that's one of the rules of measurement that we have to make sure that we go over. So I hope this was helpful. If you have more questions, let me know.